When Republicans won the majority in the House on November 2nd, they changed the career trajectory of North County's Congressman Darrell Issa. Issa is not exactly a household name in San Diego, but it certainly is becoming known nationally. His party's victory moved him into the influential role as chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And just how powerful could he become, and what might this mean for San Diego? With me is John Warren, editor and publisher of San Diego Voice and Viewpoint. John, the national press is calling Congressman Issa the Republicans' chief watchdog, a thorn in the president's side, a annoyer-in-chief, and other such descriptive phrases. How is he planning to carry out his new position?
Well, he perceives his position as one of overseer of all government. He said it all belongs to us. He's going to hold hearings. He wants to hold at least 14 hearings a week with each of his 7 subcommittees. He wants to go after the administration, and he believes he can make budget savings and do a lot of things from that standpoint. The reality is that in this position as chairman, there is nothing new. The party that's out of power in terms of the White House always seeks, if it's in control of the House, to exercise oversight over the programs of the administration. So that party's doing. It doesn't mean anything for San Diego County, though, because with that chairmanship does not come additional dollars or perks to reach the constituency of North County.
Now, his predecessors also carried forth this role. How would this make him more powerful than his predecessors? They kind of limited their role to questioning the executive branch. He wants subpoena powers for other watchdog agencies.
He wants to go across the board. Now, in the end of George Bush administration, with the Democrats in control of the House, there was more activity in terms of oversight. Clearly, with the Democrats in control of both the House under President Obama and the White House, there's been less activity. And so now he wants this subpoena power, because the subpoena power is key to mandating that people come before the committee when they are sent for. And he wants that power to be expanded so that he can go after all kinds of agencies, TARP, anywhere, stimulus money, anything that's on the table. He wants to be able to pull people in and look into their records and see if he can find waste and abuse, according to what he says.
Why?
Well, the Congress started implementing oversight back in 1974. I think it was during the Nixon White House, because the party in power has a tendency to ignore provisions or rewrite regulations and guidelines to accommodate themselves, and that's not always consistent with the way the program is working. And so here he's saying the president is corrupt. He's made this statement before, and we're going to just ride shotgun. And I've made the statement that I find his behavior to be kind of a mixture between McCarthy in terms of his approach to going after everything, and Hitler in terms of it's all mine. If it's not my way, it's not going to be at all.
That's a pretty powerful comment on him. And yet, if he is in a position of power, why is it that you feel that this would not be good for San Diego?
Well, because his position of power goes beyond his local constituency. It goes to a national responsibility. And that national responsibility does not allow him to just look at the dollars and cents coming to the California delegation and say, we're just going to zero in on that. He has a broader responsibility in terms of that committee. And so while it's a nice plus for him, it makes him a member of the spotlight, and it gives him power in the House, he's still facing budget cuts within his own committee right now, as the Republicans say they're going to cut back in the House.
Well, it's interesting because he said his goal is to focus on places where money can be saved. He's very much aware of the financial situation, and he's targeted $40 billion a year in fraud or waste in Medicare. You know, Medicare, one of the most revered programs that we have. So how valuable would that be for our economy?
Well, see, that's an example of the lack of integrity, because when the president pushed for health care reform, one of the things he announced was the funding of some of the new programs under eliminating the fraud, waste, and abuse that they were finding in Medicare itself. So why make it appear as if this president is perpetuating waste when the president himself made it clear that they are identifying? Now, he can go after the TARP monies. There's been some misallocation of stimulus dollars, but he still has to allow that this administration is trying to act in good faith.
Okay, so finally, John, I want to bring it back to the local again. You know, the whole idea of having a a representative in Congress is so that he can, sure, represent us in Congress, but also so he can bring home the bacon. Is there no bacon that we can expect him to bring home?
And see, that's very important because the Republicans under this new leadership is saying we're going to eliminate earmarks, and that's a way of getting the bacon in the pork barrels. And so how's he going to bring more bacon to San Diego when the bacon is being cut off by his own providers? So therefore, no, he can't do this without there being some contradiction between what he says he wants to do in terms of saving money and representing the people in terms of bringing more here.
Thank you very much, John Warren.